military announcing a state of emergency.
Myanmar's 10-year journey to democracy appears to be over.
Myanmar is the northwesternmost country of mainland Southeast Asia. It is bordered with China, Bangladesh, Thailand and Laos, having the Bay of Bengal in its west and Andaman Sea in its south. Myanmar political system is a parliamentary republic. The total population is 53 million with the capital city of Naypyidaw. After being pushed through almost 50 years of military rule, Myanmar finally held its first free and open election in 2015 and NDL won the landslide. However, with such a big share of the vote, NDL still had to deal with the military. The military agreed to share power because the new constitution guaranteed 25% of the seat in the parliament. In February 2021, the military announced a 1 year of state emergency, and that power would be handed over to the military general Min Aung Hlaing. But why go through all that trouble? And why did the military stage the coup now? To know what's going on, we need to know about the history first. Myanmar spent 124 years under the British rule. In the year after World War II, the country finally gained its independence as the Union of Burma. However, there was unrest and fighting between many different ethnic and cultural groups that make up the country. In 1962, the military staged a coup, scrapped Burma's constitution, and created a military junta. What followed was a one-party state headed by BSPP. It wasn't until 1988 that BSPP had its power truly changed by a nationwide protest movement. Started by students, the movement spread to hundreds of thousands of protesters, and Aung San Suu Kyi emerged as a leading voice. It wasn't until the late 2000s that the military announced it was going to start moving towards more democratic system of government. However, the 2010 election was surrounded by accusations of the interference and fraud. The election was actually boycotted Aung San Suu Kyi and the Earl.
In charge between 2011 and 2015. During that time, the military still, effectively controlled the country.
India won the election in 2015 during its first free and open election. Yet, the constitution blocked Aung San Suu Kyi from being president as she had kids who has the citizens of other country. So, she had to settle for the title of state councillor and was recognized by pretty much everyone as Myanmar's actual leader. And that brings us to the reason why the military staged this coup. For years now, Aung San Suu Kyi has been talking about removing the military from parliament, and by winning the landslide and election, put NDL closer to the goal. The military coup has put a risk of economic progress with 10% decrease in 2021 GDP, and it has lost around $3.5 billion in FDI. Determined to disobey and resist the military at any cost, factory workers, bank employees, and more have joined the civil disobedience movement, bringing economic activities a standstill. While the US and the EU have enacted targeted sanctions against military-owned companies, 13% of the private investors have begun to shun the country. In addition, business transactions have been hampered by internal shutdown imposed by military to stifle protests. Moreover, Myanmar banking system is at verge of collapse due to cash shortage. Therefore, depositors cannot withdraw their saving accounts and customers cannot pay business. As of August, 1,006 people are now confirmed killed by this junta coup, as the actual number is likely to be higher. The report said 5,730 people are currently in detention in Myanmar, with 255 of them having been sentenced to prison. In addition, Myanmar lost an estimated 1.2 million jobs in its second quarter. Urban poverty is also expected to triple, as the worsening security situation continues to affect supply chains and hinder the movement of people, services, and commodities. Since the takeover by the military, there is social unrest within the country. There are ongoing suppression and violence to the people. In this connection, we will have to figure out if there is any existing mechanisms in dealing with this issue. How does the international community react on this matter? What have they done? There are numerous countries that have condemned the military takeover and subsequent crackdown. In terms of mechanism from the international community, they have responded with this issue by condemning the military government and put the sanctions on the military officials.
The United States continues to strongly condemn the military coup in Myanmar.
The condemnation is made in order to preserve the military government to cease the violence in the country and open for the discussion with the involved parties.
The United States remains deeply alarmed by the military coup in Burma. We condemn the campaign of violent repression, and we are committed to supporting the people there as they work to return their nation to the path of democracy.
Meanwhile, the United Nations also plays part in these issues by releasing the condemnation statement.
The Council held close consultation on the situation in Myanmar on the 31st March 2021. The member of Security Council expressed deep concerns at the rapidly deteriorating situation and strongly condemned the use of violence against peaceful protesters.
Moreover, Myanmar's former ambassador to the UN voiced the concerns over the coup in his country, and as a result, he was chased out by the military government from this position.
We need further strongest possible action from the international community to immediately end the military coup, to stop oppressing the innocent people, to return the state power to the people, and to restore the democracy.
Besides the international community, ASEAN, as a regional organization, also works their best in solving with the issues.
The Association of Southeast Asian Nations is an important part of this picture. Since its founding, ASEAN has played an important role in its regions through diplomacy, conflict prevention, and peace building in conflict situations.
ASEAN has called for meetings with its members to discuss and find the solution for the problem under the chairmanship of Brunei. As a result, ASEAN reached the 5-point consensus that demand the military government to stop the violence and release the detained politicians.
The situation in Myanmar is unacceptable and should not continue. Violence must be stopped, and democracy, stability and peace in Myanmar must be returned immediately.
The 5-point consensus is considered as the regional mechanism from ASEAN to address the crisis in Myanmar. It is worth noting that it was accepted by the military leader as well. But one thing that we have to question is about whether or not the 5-point consensus is effective on this matter. Since the release of 5-point consensus, there have not been any special envoy from ASEAN to Myanmar. There was the request from Brunei Special Envoy to meet Aung San Suu Kyi, but there was no response from the military government. This is something we should observe to see if it really works in solving with the crisis.
nearly deserted streets in cities and towns across Myanmar as the nation observed a silent strike to mark International Human Rights Day.
Even after 11 months of the military coup, Myanmar still suffers from the internal violence and injustice resulting in the country being on the verge of the state collapse. It looked like the country had become an autocratic and gave little hope to citizens. They rely on ASEAN to solve the conflict. However, ASEAN is not speaking with one voice on Myanmar. Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, and initially even the Philippines, once the most liberal state on human rights and democracy, have all refused to criticize the coup due to internal matter. Singapore, the biggest foreign investors in Myanmar, has been stronger in its statement, expressing grave concern and describing the use of lethal force against protesters as inexcusable. There were also responses from the US and the EU by imposing sanctions. However, the sanctions had little influence on the decisions made by the ruling junta except for curbing the Burmese economy. Therefore, there is a need to call for a more comprehensive solution toward the issue. ASEAN reached a 5-point consensus with the coup leaders to cease the fire and violence and begin with a constructive dialogue with all the involved parties. However, the conflicting parties in Myanmar are not interested in engaging in a dialogue process one-on-one. The international community can address this political crisis by calling out all stakeholders within Myanmar to the negotiable table, including the NUG members and Aung San Suu Kyi, ethnic minority groups that have borne the brunt of military offensive and horrific human rights abuses for decades, as well as those who have led peaceful protests, the civil disobedience movement, and other efforts including armed actions against the junta. Quiet diplomacy could also be effective in this case. The junta is paranoid with an anti-Western sentiment, and it does not have much respect for ASEAN either. But generally, it is comfortable with some global figures such as Bill Richardson of the US and Yohei Sasakawa from Japan has said. Both visited Myanmar in November, and they should continue talking to the top brass. Similarly, the West needs to convince the NUG that political dialogue is a way forward. China holds much leverage on both sides, so it is essential to have Beijing on board in this as well. Through various analysis and perspective, we can see that there is a concern whether the situation in Myanmar will develop to be a peace-loving nation or the circumstance remains disastrous, or even worse than the current situation. It is also up to the government of Myanmar and other stakeholders including the military, Aung San Suu Kyi, and other ethnic minority groups, whether or not they cooperate with one another and agree on implementing the conflict resolutions. All in all, the solutions for tackling the issue within Myanmar obviously exist as long as all the stakeholders cooperate. That is why the situation in Myanmar still remains debatable.